Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Happy, Healthy, and Skeptical. We are your hosts, Jennifer Hobson and Christy Palermo, and today we are going to be talking about boundaries. Christy, I'm excited to ask this question because I think a lot of different things come to mind when people are asked, and I hope that the listeners actually stop and think about what I'm asking. But what is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word boundary?
Yeah, instinctually, I feel myself, I could go in a lot of directions when I first hear it. But I guess at the core of it, I think of it as a rule to be followed, something that's going to stop me from doing something else. But I feel like it's really evolved, obviously, because there's so many different facets for it. Because I think first boundaries with like sports when you're growing up and different rules that have to be followed there. But then now as we're adults, you think of boundaries setting with people, with relationships. That was a big major part of the word for me right now. I'd say is more relationships than anything, and setting boundaries, whether it be work, family, friends, minding my own time and business, and and yeah, I would say probably mostly relationship though. How about
Perfect.
for you?
Well, for me, it's interesting when you were saying, like thinking of sports, I almost visualize a fence, right? Because we do have tiny people. So you're like, this is the boundary when you're talking physical boundary. You can't go outside this backyard. That is where you can live. You have all this freedom within this boundary. And if you take that same visualization and apply it to, not physical boundaries, but maybe they're intellectual or boundaries in a relationship, it's the same idea. I'm creating the parameters of where you are allowed to go, and I'm also creating the parameters of where I'm not allowing you to go. So when you talk about the idea of a boundary, what do you think is the most effective or important boundary for you in this season right now?
I would say boundaries with my time, and that can be whether it be I'm scheduling, setting my own boundaries with work time, or sometimes it's when I'm allowing people to contact me and setting boundaries with schedule and time for work, for personal time. And I think that's been most effective because especially coming into motherhood the last couple years, and how I've always been like, oh yeah, call me, I'm free, like, I'll make it work. I was always that person. I'll make it work. And so plus that goes back to another thing I've been dealing with, which is people pleasing. And so just always wanted to kind of be available, which that's actually way more stressful than anything. So once I had kids, I really had to learn to set the boundaries, because there are certain times of the day it's just not, I just cannot be on the phone, or whether it be friendly and family or work. So I've had to set strict scheduling times. But it's helped me a lot because I mean, who doesn't like a schedule? I feel like my toddlers sometimes. I definitely work way better on schedules too, and it helps all of us. So it's helped me be more effective in both my family life and my business, to be more secure in setting those boundaries with my schedule.
I agree with that, especially because when you're always available, it's hard for you and whoever's involved to make things a priority, right? It's hard to, maybe in business, to make sure that you have that conversation you said you're going to have, because if you're always available, well, you'll always get to it tomorrow or the next day. She'll be around the next day, or she'll be around the day after that. And then 3 weeks go by and you haven't made it a priority to talk because I'm always assuming I can push it off or you're always going to be available. So I really like the idea of, time boundary. It's a true thing. And I think what's great about time boundary is there's two sides of it. There's holding yourself accountable to the boundary you're creating for you and how you treat your time. And then you're creating the boundary for outside people and any other relationship you have and how other people view and really appreciate your time boundary. Because, like you said, if you're available all the time, whether or not somebody isn't intentionally trying to, a lot of times what happens to creep in is people start to take advantage of the openness and the availability that you have that's endless. There's no beginning and there's no end. So I am constantly available. And that is extremely draining, I think, mentally and physically. And we've talked about this in other conversations, but you always have to go back to how am I protecting? And that's the other word I think of with boundary is how am I protecting myself? And in this specific example, how am I protecting my time so that I'm using it the most efficiently that I can? Have you found yourself gravitating towards any other specific boundary, or have you improved in any boundary maybe in the last season or two?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I feel like I've improved on it because, like I said, I had to. And then going into a season very shortly here with having a third child and having to set boundaries around just people visiting and coming to be in our home with the new baby and the kids and all of us, because of course we all want to spend time with our families and friends and stuff, but also realizing what we have to keep protecting for our family for what's going to help us succeed in this stressful season. So it's something that I've really had to work on, and it's really about just being clear. And for anybody listening, Jen and I have the same mentor and we love her and she's amazing. And she often says, clear is kind. And I absolutely love that. And I have it written down in so many places because, and Jen showing me her notes as we speak, that she has it too. Because it's just so, but it's so concise, I guess is the word I'm looking for, that I have to repeat it to myself a lot because I tend to want to, again, people pleasing. I tend to want to say what I think people want to hear or need to hear, but it's not always the best thing or boundary for me. It's not always protecting me and my family. So if I am just clear with what I need and what I expect, then that is kind. That is because then everybody understands, everybody agrees, and then having to set those same boundaries around for everybody. So it's not just like for one person, but keeping that across the board for everybody in my life or with work, and being clear. And so that is something I've had to work on. So I feel like I've gotten better at it. I definitely have a ways to go because it's still, just thinking about it, it like stresses me out that it's still a point that I need to work on. But I feel like it's definitely gotten better, and just always repeating that to myself, clear is kind, clear is kind. And I think that can be a really powerful tool in helping someone like me, if anybody's like me and having trouble speaking up in that way, that it's actually better for everybody involved to just know what you want and what you need. And sometimes you just have to ask for it.
Yeah, I think it's both. Sometimes it's like you said, it's asking for something that you require, and then it's also to create the boundary. And we're clearly talking about communication here. This is the form of communication that you have to utilize when it comes to boundaries. I think for me, that's actually somewhere where I shine. I am direct, and sometimes that doesn't always cushion the blow for a lot of people. And I have had to deal with the fallout of some people not being able to handle my clear, direct communication. So it's finding that fine line between being clear and direct, but also being kind. And it is a fine line. And when you think about it, and what the ideas of, well, how can I be more clear? And I just want to encourage you, really avoid certain trigger words, using the word maybe or I think, and changing it to this is a definitive, this is a definite, or I know this is true for me. And the if you could, and changing if you could to I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And it goes back to feeling safe and feeling protected. And that doesn't mean, warm and fuzzy, but it means feeling safe and feeling protected. And if you're using those fluff words or the words that allow people to not really understand what you require, the maybes, and then I think because what you think you're doing is you think you're making it easier for them or you're being kinder to them and gentler to them, when in reality, you're just making it extremely confusing and you're really making it very gray. And what I'll tell you, what I found with boundaries is that when people walk away with disappointment, it's because they have a lack of expectation, right? Disappointment is always based on the expectation of yourself or the person, whichever kind of relationship you're in, whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, a family member, or even a client. If someone ends up being disappointed, it's because you both didn't have the same expectation. And think about that. Maybe in a relationship, there was a time that you fought, and it's because at the end of the day, you didn't have the same expectation. You didn't have the same expectation going out to dinner. One person thought you were having this extravagant, amazing date night that was going to last all night. And the other person was like, I was just freaking starving. I thought we were just going to go to the fastest place available. Different expectations followed by disappointment. And it might be because you weren't clear on what your expectation was. So, yes, we're talking about boundaries, but I think they're directly connected to your expectation and your communication. And just like Christy said, and I love that she said it because it was written down, I showed it to her as she was saying it, is clear as kind. Stop getting rid of the fluff words or the easy way out words, I kind of think of them, because you think you're softening the blow for people when really you're just muddying the water, and later down you're both going to be disappointed because the expectation was not clear. And I don't know how you feel about that, or if there's been a time you have actually experienced that, Christy.
I 100% agree with that because, again, back to our mentor, she coached me on this. I swear it was like the first week of starting my business 5.5 years ago. And she called it watered down words. And that I do tend to, because I'm trying to, like you said, it's like I think I'm softening what I'm saying, but really it's not giving any clear direction to anybody. So just being more direct in where I'm speaking and saying, like you said, I need, because right, when I talk to you, you are very clear. So there's never a question of what you're wanting or needing in whatever scenario, where I just tend to would want to be like, okay, well, whatever you want to do, where I've had to be more, okay, well, I think, or I need, instead of exactly what you said, maybe, or we should. And also, along with that is just sometimes making a damn decision. keeping keeping that, well, like if you're going to make a plan with somebody and I'm trying to be better about this, where in the past I would just be like, oh, well, let me think about it, I'll get back to you. But it's like, if I just make the decision there, if I know, or if it's, especially if it's something I know I don't really want to go to, then just make the decision for myself, set that boundary. I don't have to say yes to everything. And being able to just be decisive, which is a word that I'm working on right now personally, being decisive and just making the damn decision sometimes. And that is clear, and that sets a boundary. And then it sets everybody up for just knowing, it doesn't always have to be a conflict in your schedule to say no. I don't want to go. Just say, I'm sorry, that's not going to work for me. I can't go into this one.
And I think that's so much nicer than dragging out the inevitable. So someone now has an expectation that you might say yes when the whole time you knew you were going to say no. So now you're just dragging out the inevitable of disappointing them because the expectation has changed. And I think for you, the growth around creating boundaries, it doesn't come because you're not capable. I think it's always because you don't want to hurt someone. You don't want to ever hurt someone's feelings. But when we kind of take a look at it a different way, is now we're creating a possibility for disappointment when down the line I finally become clear and I finally tell you how I feel about maybe something you did or something I did. And now the conversation's even more uncomfortable because they're going to question, why didn't you talk to me that way to begin with? Why have you waited? And now again, the expectation has resulted in disappointment. And we are all just trying to avoid disappointing ourselves, right? And disappointing others. Obviously, there's some times where I don't care if I disappoint someone because they're not in my circle right now and they have to own their disappointment. And I think that's the other thing. Don't get it misconstrued. You don't own other people's disappointment. All you own is your boundary and your expectation in relationship. And the way that you show that is you practice what you preach. And I think that's super important. So if you tell one person, I'm protecting my time, and you've set out a schedule like Christy said, or you have a calendar and you invite people to schedule certain times, but then you're not doing it for everyone, or you're not even holding it to yourself, right? You're just kind of willy-nilly going through your day. People aren't, they're going to lose trust in you. They're going to lose trust in you. They're going to lose belief in you, and they're going to lose trust in your boundaries, and they're going to cross them. And that's when it's going to be a problem. And I think the other thing is we have to think about how many different places can I have boundaries? A lot of times I think as entrepreneurs, we think they're pretty black and white, right? I only have boundaries with my romantic relationship, or I only have boundaries with my kid. But I had really kind of gone back and reflected on this, and there's a lot of them, and there's probably some I won't even mention. Christy, you might even have different ones, but the ones that I think of are like physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, emotional or mental boundaries, spiritual and religious boundaries. There's financial. There's also intellectual, like thought boundaries and being open to somebody else's opinions. And then time boundaries. We just talked about that one for a while. That one's huge. And then the last but not least is the non-negotiables. What are the things that are so important to you that there is no question in your mind and there is a non-negotiable? So have you even given thought to all the different ways you can create boundaries for yourself and different types of relationship?
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that one because those are all great ones, and I would probably have the same list as that. But the only one I would add on is just literally so specifically spatial, just
Yeah.
space boundary. Because I mean, having been a dancer too, and knowing when somebody is in your space, get out of my circle.
No, and I think that is a huge one, especially if you are maybe in close quarters or you have tiny humans like us, right? I start to feel overwhelmed when my spatial boundaries feel like they're being invaded, right? And as love as I love my children, there's one, like basically open face kissing my mouth at 16 months old, and there's one sitting literally not just on my side, but basically on my lap, and there's loud noises in the back, and da 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 da, and my expectation of love and warming has now been smothered.
And that spatial boundary turns into the other emotional and intellectual, and like it just keeps all building onto each other. So I'm glad that you bring up that list of things, because it's true to also just recognize like, oh, I hadn't even thought of some of those that you said. But it's good to really reflect on, and maybe even after this, as you're listening to this, but to think about later how it affects you in those ways, but also what are some things you can do in each area to protect yourself. Again, back to the word protection. Protect yourself, protect your schedule, your family, your work. And as you were talking too, it also made me think of when it does come to work, for those of you who are entrepreneurs, have a business, and you are talking to people. And I just think of it as, through the years of having my own business, 5.5 years now, and I think of when somebody responds to me very fluffy is a word you used, and non-direct, and just will respond to part of my message, but maybe not the whole thing. And I always think, I mean, you could just say no, and that's and that's fine. And then it makes me think, okay, when I'm speaking or responding to people, so this could be, I'm speaking business wise right now, but it could be any type of conversation or messaging, because of course we all know a lot gets lost in messaging or misconstrued in messaging and emails, and we all use texting and all of that a lot more these days. But making sure that you're setting a certain boundary, like as you're speaking to people, in the way that you want to see it as well.
I think that's huge. I think, and that brings up that communication can come with a boundary, right? There's so many ways. I mean, I even laugh sometimes, especially with my close friends. I might be having 3 different conversations with them simultaneously on 3 different apps. I mean, Christy and I have even done it. We're in text message, we're sending a message on Instagram, and then maybe she sent me something on WhatsApp. Who knows? But if there's something that I think is important enough that requires for me to be clear and kind, I want to encourage you. Yes, this is a little bit old school for those people that do not pick up the phone, but pick up the phone or make it a priority to be in person when you have something very, very important to communicate to the other person. I think you are so correct that so much is lost in translation. And I have gone down that rabbit hole, again, creating a boundary where now I'm just like venomous, like spewing stuff over text because I'm treating my communication like it's my journal, right? Everything that I've been feeling and saying, I'm putting on that person, and that's not fair either. So you need to create the boundaries around communication. What are you open to saying? And then what form of communication are you open to using when it requires, that clear, kind, direct communication?
Absolutely.
I think this one is great, and boundaries don't need a lot of communication. They just need clear communication. We've listed out some of the ways that we've created boundaries, and I would really encourage you to think of all the different types of relationships that you have, just like Christy said, because they're not just romantic relationships. It might be, a client relationship, it might be a family member relationship. I know, with Christy having 3 kids, right? You have to change your boundaries and change what's happening. For me, we have people that live far away and we have people that live close. So now you're trying to do it for everyone, and you have to go, you know what? What's the best? Start with you. What's best for my family? And what's also best for the other people involved? And I think that's important because you're not just trying to make you feel safe and protected, you're also trying to make the other person feel safe and protected. I don't think creating boundaries is selfish. I honestly think that creating boundaries is something that is generous. And I think we all need to take the time to figure out how can we give back to the people in our lives, and how can we protect our time and our energy and our mindset at the end of the day. Because if our mindset is being infiltrated constantly with negative thoughts, we can't move forward on the things that we're trying to accomplish. So as you kind of finish up listening to us, I want you to really take the time and say, have I created some healthy boundaries, or have I actually created some non-healthy boundaries that need to be shifted?
Because
Christy,
it's never too late and you can
no,
take the time, right? And you can just start moving forward from here. You don't have to backtrack on any of it. That's what I've learned, is you just start from here. And sometimes it's, if it feels better to just say, hey, I need to set this for myself, and this has been really hard for me, and I need to set this. And maybe you don't use the word boundary, but you just saying there's some things I'm working on in my personal life, and I just need to make this clear for you and for me, because I don't think I've been clear in the past, and it's really hard for me to speak about it, but I'm trying, and I hope I can be clear right now. So sometimes it is just speaking up about it and being really transparent in that way.
absolutely. And I think, there are times if you haven't created these boundaries, like Christy said, you can absolutely start here. Just know you may have resistance from the people in your life right now. But again, this is one of those times to take stock of the people that you have around you. If you have the people that are meant to be around you, they will be positive around your boundaries, and they'll be supportive of your boundaries because they want to see you do the best that you can. They want to see you improve, and they want to see you happy. So I truly think the right people are going to be really supportive of your boundaries. And if you start to feel resistance, that's okay. But be clear on your non-negotiables, maybe even journal it out. What are the things you are not willing to let into your life? And what are the things that you just want to create? But I want to thank you again, guys, for listening. We do have these conversations for you guys, so definitely join the conversation. You can find Instagram at Happy Healthy Skeptical.